The ego is the system that runs your sense of self. It is made out of thought patterns, emotions, and behavior loops, and the stories that try to hold it all together. Left unchecked, it creates endless existential searching, chronic disconnection, and the persistent sense that something is wrong. The goal of my videos is clarity, to see your identity and its contradictions for what they are, named precisely, to finally understand what it is that we're all running away from. Understanding the nature of identity is the most important thing a human can do for their own life and their own psychology, because nothing is more crucial than understanding who you are or what you are, because society feeds you an endless amount of delusions about what you're supposed to be, what you currently are, and a lot of ideologies and religions foster this idea that you need to pledge allegiance to them so that you can be certain about what the nature of reality is. But when you really start to ponder what you have been fed and what it is like to be a human and what type of experiences are possible, then it becomes extremely obvious that identity is the biggest mystery that you can possibly wonder about, because you are forced outside of the logical Western paradigm where rationalism has been indoctrinated into us as the highest good. But if rationalism was the highest good and we could figure out everything with science and pure reason, then why are we so depressed? Why are we living in a society that feels more disconnected than ever before? Because the disconnection already starts from within. It already starts from not understanding what identity is. The consequences of realizing that there is actually something to figure out, there is actually an identity to come in contact with that is so absolute and so certain that it actually resolves all the crushing experiences a human is confronted with on a daily basis. When you start to see that there is actually something behind the veil of ordinary human consciousness, and that you can be in deeper contact with something larger than yourself, then most humans enter a state of ontological shock. Suddenly, your entire nature of being is being questioned by something you don't understand. And there are many horrible, deeply traumatizing events that can come from this type of realization. It is the door to immense freedom and immense compassion and self-understanding, but it usually is also the door towards a lot of existential pain. In this video, I'm going to talk about what are typical symptoms of this ontological shock and how it kind of breaks your brain for a while. What is so difficult to understand is that reality is tautological. This is what identity really is. That's why there's not really any proof for identity, because it kind of proves itself. That's what a tautology is. It's like 1 = 1. It's so tautological that if you start to question it, you would literally go insane, because there's nothing to question. It is defined by itself. But what we humans do is we separate ourselves from reality, and now are trying to figure out how identity works as if we could separate ourselves from reality and observe it like, a scientist. And it functions in a practical sense. We can create science, we can invent rockets that fly us out of space. All of this has immense value, but for the personal identity, it doesn't work, because you're always meshed in with reality. There's no separation between you and the atom that you're observing. Your experience and the idea of a dream or a hallucination or a fantasy. Everything will always happen within experience. And so, in identity is self-defined. So the realization that thoughts, for example, don't really exist as your true identity can be in an extreme shock to your entire nervous system. And people here become very spiritual, because the sense of dissolving into existence, or being one with reality, or being yourself, being God, dreaming that you are human, and weird things like that, get meshed into this topic. And then a lot of people find their way to God in a spiritual sense. A lot of people find themselves to Freud or Jung to figure out what goes on in their mind and what is the unconscious. And there's a weird intersection between Buddhism here too, where both spirituality kind of works with, conceptual or like modern notions of what the self is. There's a lot of overlay with Buddhism here too, where a lot of secular people are not very, fan of normal religions, but then Buddhism or Taoism speaks to them because it hints at the nature of how weird it is to be alive and what, identity is. My job is literally help people through these identity dissolutions. And it's where, the scientific and psychological converge with the spiritual and metaphysical. That's really what ontology is. It's the nature of being. And there are very few people who truly understand how this stuff functions. Because, many don't have had too many odd transcendental experiences in order to kind of understand what people are talking about when they say they experience themselves to be God or are dissolving into the nature of reality. If you go to a psychologist and say that you feel like you're merging with God, they're going to give you medication because, we in Western society don't really understand what the hell is going on when, people say this sort of stuff. But there is a process of psychological integration with what the true nature of identity is. And when you look for some existential satisfaction, look for internal peace, or look for the nature of reality, which was always my spiel, like I really needed to find out truth or the nature of reality, then what you're doing is you're trying to figure out what your identity is, or what identity in of itself is. And for this, you need to strip all the layers of egoic delusions that have built up your entire sense of false identity. And stripping away these layers of egoic identity can be very relieving. Like it's how we cure trauma and how we cure anxiety and depression. And really all psychological illness find themselves on the layer of ego. The process of moving through these different layers of ego has depth to it. And there can be a superficial layer where you suddenly realize that you have been being very inauthentic socially, and you always lie to other people and you try to manipulate them for your own personal gain. And then you notice that you always did this because you feel insecure, because you don't want other people to judge you. And then you notice that this is how it works, and the understanding and awareness of itself makes you see how you actually are. So you come in direct contact with your identity. Oh, I am very manipulative. And then the awareness of how you operate in the world can change you. And how it changes you depends on how your nervous system and how your ego is operating. If you reject this and say, this is BS, I am not manipulative, then you might become narcissistic because you are going to build an entire architecture that doesn't want to see or look at one's own architecture, at one's own narcissism. You construct an entire identity around being either not actually manipulative, or the people that you are manipulating, you're doing it for their best interests, or you're doing some other rationalization to not confront the fact of your own self-judgment. Now, this process of seeing something about yourself that you didn't see before, realizing that, you have to change your relationship with yourself now that you realize this aspect of you, is a process where the psychological and the spiritual converge. Because on the deeper layers, suddenly it's not just about if you're manipulative or not, but it's about your entire perception of 3D space. Like if I see this YouTube video, or if you see this YouTube video right now in front of you, is any of this real? For example, you might have the sensation that I'm talking to you right now, and there's a sense of presence in this talking, but your ego is constructing the illusion, or better said, your entire mind, it's not just the ego, but your entire mind is constructing the illusion that I am here with you right now when I'm actually in the past recording this on an electronic device. But none of this really registers as important because, you're just taking me for this presence here. And calling this out might shatter the illusion a bit that you're actually probably alone right now and there's nobody actually talking to you presently. Now, this might seem like an interesting thought experiment, but utterly irrelevant in practice because, practically you're just listening to my words and receiving the information. But on deeper layers of ego dissolution or ontological shock, these disconnections become heightened and extremely obvious to an extent that it might impede you to operate normally in the world. Suddenly, you don't talk to a person anymore and feel you're talking to another being, but you're talking to a projection of your mind, and you start to feel super disconnected with ordinary reality. This is where people experience derealization or depersonalization or psychosis. And I would argue that in most instances, these experiences are an aspect of the ego disintegrating into the actual identity structure of reality. And oftentimes, what is being seen has an aspect of truth to it. For example, in science, there's the theory of relativity, meaning that time is relative. There's no singular timeline. This means that the sensation of simultaneity, the fact that something is happening at the same time, is also an illusion. Now, if you had an ontological shock through meditation, a psychedelic experience, or just psychological pondering, you then might feel disconnected from other people because you notice they are not actually in the same moment as you. And weird stuff like this. This goes away after a while when it is directly integrated, the same way with calling you manipulative and you being like, yeah, this was kind of manipulative, I'll move on. The same way you might notice, oh, okay, time is kind of relative and I'm not actually interfacing in the same like present moment as they are necessarily. Like, we're born in a different time, they're a different person, we are not actually interacting like pure consciousness one to another, but it's just this human interface with my brain processing stuff. And then there's the unconscious. And you might recognize all of this and it might shock you, or you might see it as a part of truth and you move on. And it is very distinct how each individual encounters these truths and then processes these truths. My ego architecture audit is there to help people see themselves, understand themselves, and then be able to move towards an actually well-functioning ego and an identity integration that just feels pleasant and whole to live in. And how this process works, I describe precisely in my PDF you can find in the link below. Something else that can happen, and it also happened to me, is a sense of anhedonia or apathy. I especially had this after a traumatizing psychedelic trip, where for 3 days I couldn't feel anything. There was a sense that, experiences are happening, but I felt utterly disconnected from them, and I couldn't derive a single ounce of pleasure from anything. It's like music felt empty, or food didn't taste like anything pleasurable. Just like everything was still the same, but the feeling towards it was utterly flat and just pointless. It wasn't suffering per se, but I knew that I was in a concerning situation where I also considered, is this the time to call a psychiatrist or get some other professional help? But I also knew that probably nobody or very, very few people could actually connect with the weirdness of this experience and really help me with it. And I really didn't want to get on medication or, have somebody think that I'm actually going crazy. This relates to the sense of depersonalization and derealization that often come with, the sense of apathy or anhedonia. And it's this unsettling disconnect where you feel like there's like a second dimension that is behind your mind that is actually more true than the physical reality that you're looking at, as if you're distancing yourself from actual physical reality. Then there can be the sense of cognitive disorientation, where you are constantly in a sort of brain fog because you see the limitations of language and rational thought, and then you struggle to use it again because words are now empty to you, so you can't actively function. And then your productivity plummets, your relationships plummet, and linear time also feels very confusing as you cannot communicate mundane concepts anymore. Then something else that is also very common is intense nervous system arousal. And this happens because there is this ego integration going on where the ego basically dissolves into your sense of awareness or consciousness. And this process causes immense panic and existential dread. And the ego is basically a scaffolding for your identity. Well, it is what the identity is. And then it The ego is basically a scaffolding of your identity, and its beliefs and entire identity structure is there to register as safe or as home, so you feel comfortable in your sense of self. But if this ego is insecure, or you've been traumatized, then it's unstable in a sense. And when you then go through some ontological shocking experience, now this ego basically disintegrates, and you sense that you're constantly at threat, because the ego's point is survival. And now you've basically kind of seen that this survival is pretty much arbitrary. Like, the sense of identity was never there how you thought it was there, but still you sense something is dissolving. So then you might experience panic attacks, or this constant baseline of anxiety, and you have always this possible terror in mind of what would happen if I actually let go. Would I really fall into fear and go crazy? And then there are the somatic head symptoms, because of the specific type of awakening that happens, that is very head oriented. You basically have this entire energy flow to the head. So you might feel some weird localized confusion in the head area that a lot of people report as some intense pressure or like tension. If you look into Buddhist literature, they will talk about chakra awakening, or all of this mystical stuff. Migraines are also very common, or insomnia is very typical for this hyperactive neural firing. Then there is intense grief, like a lot of emotions that can burst out once this type of head blockade is getting loose, because now you are suddenly seeing how much you've been suppressing. This is the idea of the unconscious mind coming up, and then you see old memories, old belief patterns, and all your sense of safety basically getting stripped away. And this rupture can bring you into deep grief, where you have to process a lot of very intense emotions, and you feel very lost and unsafe in the world. These are just a few examples of how deep this process can go, and I find it is highly important for every human on the planet to be informed about this process, because even on the not so far edges of things, the ego is really operating every little aspect of your world. It is how you relate to yourself, it is how you relate to other people, it is how you just move through the world. What is your purpose? What is your meaning? What happens after death? And to find a way to make this whole, and to have a structure at place that works for you, is not just the most important thing for your own happiness, but is also the cure for the sickness that is happening in the entire world, where everything is so selfish and so ego driven. Because it's not that the ego is bad or a problem or must be destroyed or must be dissolved, but it must be integrated into the human mind in a way that actually is healthy. And our society is chronically sick. It teaches its narrative or its traumatic behaviors onto the next generation, and then they carry it on to the next generation. And we are living in this weird egoic society where everybody has to fend for themselves, and nobody is allowing themselves to deeply connect with another person. There are an endless amount of problems that the ego causes for almost every single person on the planet right now, and it's not really explored, especially not in the context of the psychedelic renaissance that we are in right now, or our understanding of Buddhist philosophy and how this integrates. And I want to be a voice that gives a mechanical framing of these things, that can use words like God without it being super spiritual coded and understood as an aspect of experience that one can connect with. And most important of all, no matter what you're going through, you can be healed. And most important of all, no matter what you're going through, you can feel whole, you can feel safe, and you can be at peace. If you have a negative view of yourself or the world, it is always your own internal architecture and your reality model that is making it so. There's nothing that can shift. Everything can shift because the human mind, everything can shift because the human is the most adaptable and psychological resilient species on this planet. And yes, we can experience the pits of hell by this process of knowing oneself, but you can also find a heavenly bliss and a childlike beautiful curiosity with everything that you engage with. And you know this because you were a child before, and you probably have glimpses of what it is like to be a healthy human mind. And this same experience is accessible permanently. Of course, through age, some things change. We are not going to look at a tree as if it was the first time anymore, but something similar is really available.